Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to the third and final seminar in the series hosted by Project Bonhoeffer on the overall theme of Bonhoeffer and the threat to democracy today. We're absolutely delighted to be able to host two such distinguished speakers with us today, Professor Rachel Muers and Professor John de Gruchy. In 2022, Rachel became the first woman and the first Quaker to hold the chair of divinity at the University of Edinburgh, which has actually been since it was first established in 1620. Before that, she was Professor of Theology at the University of Leeds. She's published widely on modern Christian theology and ethics, and a constant theme of her work has been a sustained engagement with the work of Bonhoeffer. And so we're delighted that she's going to be able to speak to us today on Truth, Lies and Folly, Bonhoeffer and the World of Alternative Facts. I have to confess that I chickened out a bit on the title of this seminar because
We'll hear about that later. Yeah.
Rachel proposed that this should be called Truth, Lies, Folly and Bullshit, Bonhoeffer and the World of Alternative Facts. But anyway, our respondent, John de Gruchy, is quite simply one of the world's leading authorities on Bonhoeffer. For many years, he was Professor of Christian Studies at the University of Cape Town, and some of his early work drew upon Bonhoeffer to develop and sustain a Christian critique of apartheid, and his role in the struggle against apartheid in his native South Africa has been internationally recognised as central. Since the fall of apartheid, he's written extensively on the theology of reconciliation, Christian humanism, and published two recent books on Bonhoeffer, both of which have escaped me for the moment. Sorry. But he's also developed recently writings on Palestine and the current situation in Palestine, drawing again on the current on Bonhoeffer. Before I ask Rachel to begin, there is a couple of procedural points that I should make. First, we anticipate that there'll be ample time for questions. If you would like to post a question or make a point, you're invited to put it in the chat, or alternatively simply indicate in the chat that you would like to speak, or more old-fashionedly simply wave and either matter I am sure will spot you. One point that's relevant to that is that with the agreement of John and Rachel, the seminar is being recorded. So if you'd prefer not to appear on the recording, then again, I invite you to indicate in the chat that you would like to speak. So with that, it's a very warm welcome to Rachel, and over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. I'm attempting to share a slideshow, and I invite the chair to interrupt me if you can't see the slides or if there is a technical problem, because one of the consequences of sharing the slides is that I can't see you all. Are we okay so far, Chair?
So far, it's fine.
Fantastic. Let's keep going. Thank you very much, Alan, for the introduction, and everybody for the invitation. It's wonderful to be back with Project Bonhoeffer, for which I was a trustee for many years, and it's a tremendous honour to be in conversation with John de Gruchy, whose work I've learned a great deal from, and whose work is admired throughout the theological world, really. So this is a tremendous opportunity, and really glad to be part of this series as well, which is once again bringing out the ongoing and changing and always often surprising relevance of Bonhoeffer for the specific challenges that we face today. So I'm really glad to be able to contribute to it. At the moment, I'm trying to write a book about truth. And when I tell people that, they often say something like, well, that's very timely. To which I sometimes reply, I hope it's not too late. And we all know what we're talking about. As you'll know, post-truth, quote unquote, was the Oxford English Dictionary word of the year for 2016, which already, to me at least, feels like a lifetime ago. I mean, by 2016, this idea of post-truth had been in use for a few decades, actually. But 2016 saw it come into its own, and you'll recall that's Brexit year, and that's first Trump election year, and it seemed very timely. And alongside alternative facts, which was what I chose for my title, post-truth seemed and still seemed to speak to the moment, right, to capture a cluster of worrying phenomena in the political space, what we might call a rapid deterioration in the truth environment. So in this talk, I'm first going to say a bit more about what that deterioration looks like. That's the diagnosis of the present situation. But the main point is obviously to reflect on how Bonhoeffer can help us engage with that moment, partly because of the political times he lived in, but also because, in my view, he has some important and quite distinctive insights about truth and the truth environment, and how to live in an age when truth is under various kinds of threat. So this is the second bullet point here. Second part, I'll be focusing on a couple of specific writings from the final years of Bonhoeffer's life. One's about folly or stupidity, hence my title, and the other's more directly about the challenge of telling the truth. And these are written when Bonhoeffer's both very intensely engaged with active political opposition to the Nazi regime and reflecting very intensely on what's been learned from that engagement and what should be taken forward into the future. So although one can take work from across Bonhoeffer's lifetime, I often find some of this later stuff where one's looking at contemporary political questions has a certain freshness to it, because he's got this, as I say, this intensity of trying to do something, to take a particular kind of action, and partly because he thinks he's not getting out alive, this intensity of thinking, what have we learned from this, and what needs to be done next. So on the basis of that, I'm making at the end a few initial suggestions about what we should be learning from Bonhoeffer about what Christian witness to truth looks like. But I should warn you that I'm really hoping that last point will emerge in the discussion. So we'll see where we'll get to. Anyway, so I'm starting with a few points of diagnosis about the problem I'm trying to address. And this is post-truth. When people talked and wrote about post-truth in 2016, they were mostly talking about a distrust of traditional expertise, including scientific expertise, that had spiralled into a disbelief that there was any such thing as expertise. It is, I don't know, we'll see what you think, an anti-science environment in significant chunks of public discourse, the taken for granted background of public discourse, an anti-science environment that might have started out as distrust of some particular group of scientists, but became disconnection from the whole enterprise of science. The attempt to establish the truth on the basis of evidence and to revise truth claims in the light of later evidence, When I'm discussing scientific truth and why scientific approaches to truth might be really important for theologians and ethicists, I sometimes refer to the quotation attributed to Oliver Cromwell, "Think it possible that you may be mistaken." And I pair it with the equally important opposite, "Think it possible that you may be right." Because it's not just science, but any space of good faith inquiry, it seems to me, requires both of those. People need to be willing to believe that their words and thoughts and expressions can have some purchase on reality, that you might be right. And they need to be willing to believe that reality can push back at them, that they may be mistaken. That you can approach, that you can speak of reality, you can speak of what's real, and that the real can push back at you. Pretty essential for not just for science, but for good faith inquiry, and both of these, I would suggest, are at risk in the present post-truth environment. Which brings me neatly to the next major concern, the polarisation of public discourse. I have a folks familiar enough now with the polarisation, post-truth, populism ways of, I'm not talking about populism this time, but I am talking about post-truth and polarisation. Right. One of my go-to texts, again, when I'm talking about to theologians for describing the situation of polarisation is Matthew 11:16-17. This is Jesus' image of the children in the marketplace. To what shall I compare this generation? They're like children in the marketplace, playing a game and calling out to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not mourn. Separate groups shouting at each other. You're not dancing to our tune. You're not playing our game. This is an image in my head of the contemporary public sphere. A way of communicating that's primarily aimed at reinforcing patterns of inclusion and exclusion. Who are we and who are you? Yeah. And also patterns of dominance and subordination. This is our space. We make the rules. We play the tune. It seems to me that we've seen in at least some parts of the public sphere the substitution of a set of group norms for reality as that to which words and claims are supposed to correspond. So instead of trying to get a purchase on what is real, with the words, I'm trying to get a purchase on what kind of thing my group says I'm supposed to say. So being right is agreeing with us, and being mistaken is disagreeing with us. These are our facts. And the other lot have alternative facts. And it's less important to work out which the real facts are than to shout louder than them. Yeah, so this is the image. So in the end, it's a power game, and brute force determines what counts as truth. At least the brute force of the algorithm. Right, I've got one more slide with the diagnosis stuff, and then we're getting on to Bonhoeffer quite fast, don't worry. Right. This move to the power game and to using communication as an instrument of power brings me to my third and final point, which is what Alan kindly stopped me from putting in my title, because I do want to talk about bullshit, which is a technical term coined by the philosopher Harry Frankfurt, and I genuinely have not found a better term for talking about what he's describing, because it's talking without concern for whether what you are saying is true or not. So it's not lying, it's actually a bit more serious than lying. A bullshitter, this is just Frankfurt's analysis I'm giving you, will typically claim a lot of things, say a lot of things, many of which are not true, some of which perhaps are. The key point is that he, and in Frankfurt's book, the bullshitter is a he, and I couldn't possibly comment. Anyway, he is not saying them because he believes them to be true, and is not interested in whether they are true. He's saying them because they sound good, and he's talking for some other purpose than conveying truth. To make you think he's clever, to intimidate you, to wear out his opponents, to confuse you, or whatever. Now, I suspect, frankly, every age has had bullshitters in positions of power. You can find critiques of them in Plato, I think. But it's reasonably easy, I think, to see how bullshit, in this technical sense, both flourishes in and feeds an age of truth indifference, what the Catholic ethicist Stuart Clem, from whom I've learned quite a bit about this, calls truth indifference. We lose truth not just because there's lots of lies, but because truth ceases to matter, because we get into patterns of communication in which truth is not important. And the post-truth anti-science we can't get a purchase on reality, the polarization and the bullshit are all part of that. Right. Now, seems to be fairly clear that Christians should be worried about all this. Not all of us, of course, are like me in what you could call truth-seeking professions, spending a lot of time trying to figure out what's true and getting worried when people don't care. But all of us are trying to follow Christ, who identifies himself as the truth, who testifies to the truth, who says that those who listen to him belong to the truth, and who gives the spirit of truth, who guides into truth. Or if that all sounds a lot too high-flown, we should be worried about the moral and spiritual effects of ceasing to care about truth, and also about the unjust human social effects of ceasing to care about truth. Because reality bites back one way or another. And, for example, putting yourself in a situation where you can't hear or tell inconvenient truths about the climate or about institutional malpractice or whatever, putting yourself in a situation where you can't hear or tell inconvenient truths just allows them to grow from inconvenient to deadly. And the people with less power will always lose out in that process. So much for the present situation. But why think Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Well, okay, to state the obvious, he also lives in a time when truth is under a different kind of enormous public and political threat. The age of mass propaganda and of what became famous as the big lie. The big lie. I used to write about that as a Goebbels quote, the idea of the big lie, and then it noted, and should have noted sooner, that he never described his own propaganda exercise as a big lie. That would be a bit daft when you think about it. He described British propaganda as the big lie. So make of that what you will. Anyway, Bonhoeffer's in the age of the totalitarian mass propaganda. Hannah Arendt, who's one of the most influential analysts of the totalitarian regimes and someone I find quite good to read alongside Bonhoeffer, pointed out how in a totalitarian system like Nazism, the concentration of power and the telling of lies go together. Just because the dictator literally has the power to make the lie true, to reshape reality to suit what they want, or at least to make everyone act that way. So, for example, you can say, Hitler can say, everyone in this or that organisation supports Hitler, whether or not that's true right now, and then you can get rid of all the people that don't. Yeah. So you can reshape reality to make the lie true. What's true? So in the Bonhoeffer context, where he's living, what's true and what can be said to be true is, in much of the time, determined by what power wants. So because of this alignment between truth and power, between quote unquote truth and power, or making power the determinant of truth, some of the threats are not a million miles away from our present situation, even though the political systems are so different. So Bonhoeffer's up against that. And then, as I assume most of you know, for the last few years of his life, he's involved in the conspiracy against Hitler. He's working as a triple agent. He's got all of these everyday issues about personal challenges about truth and lies. So next bit of the talk, I'm going to show you and talk about and try and bring out some aspects of extracts from two pieces that he writes in these last few years of his life, because I think they speak to his dilemmas and ours and are good to think with. Right. So the first we're going to look at in a minute is a section of the reflections for friends and family, those involved in the conspiracy against Hitler, that is written for the end of the year 1942, the turn of the year 42-43. And the extract I'm looking at focuses on Dummheit, on which gets translated as stupidity. Using a text that Bonhoeffer quotes in his discussion, I tend to read the thing I'm about to show you through the book of Proverbs, and through this idea that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, and fools despise wisdom and instruction. The point about the fools is not that they have the wrong ideas, but they don't want to know about whether the ideas are right or wrong. They have no interest in truth. Right. And Bonhoeffer is reflecting on how in his time the Nazi regime has quite deliberately and with serious spiritual consequences made fools of people. Here we go. There's a lot of text on the slide, so I'm going to pull out bits of, I'll try and talk you through bits and pieces as we go. But if you spot anything here that you want to talk more about later, we could do that. Right. So have a look first at just this bit right at the top. Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice, than evil intent. One may protest against evil, against stupidity. We're defenceless. Reasons fall on deaf ears. Facts that contradict one's prejudgment simply need not be believed. And when facts are irrefutable, they're simply pushed away as inconsequential, like the alternative facts, post-truth. And then a little way further down, the third paragraph I've got there, in conversation with the stupid person, one virtually feels that one is dealing not at all with him as a person, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like that have taken possession of him. On the face of it, this is quite depressing, really, but still perhaps worth hearing, because one of the things Bonhoeffer's picked up is that sometimes in a deformed truth environment, sometimes just persisting in being rational, insisting on the facts, acting as if everyone is interested in truth and open to reason, is not the right approach. But this is a very important point to bear in mind. This isn't because of some sort of defect in the individual people involved. It's a social phenomenon. And it's linked to the upsurge of power. That's my second paragraph here, Bonhoeffer's second paragraph. It is in essence not an intellectual defect, but a human one. Every strong upsurge of power in the public sphere, be it political or religious, infects a large part of humankind with stupidity. The power of one needs the stupidity of others. Well, this on the one hand makes stupidity more of a threat, right? Because it could happen to anyone, right? He's very specifically not saying these are people with a low IQ or something like that. Quite the opposite. So that makes it more of a threat, right? It's not, oh, just we educate everybody better and then we don't have this problem. It's a social problem. It's a human problem. It's a problem associated with abuse of power, right? This also means we can't get round it by setting up another opposition of us and them. We're the clever ones, they're the stupid ones. It could be us. And I'm really struck at it by the fact he draws attention here to the upsurge of religious power. Because it suggests that if religious people trying to think about how to address this, the answer is not to join in the same game, to join in the war of words, to try and find a way of making ourselves more powerful with our speech so we can pull more people over to our side. Because what's needed to overcome this kind of stupidity is not liberation from not just liberation from a specific power. It's really weird. Not just stop listening to Hitler or whatever, but liberation from being under anyone's power, right? Because that's where we get to in this fourth paragraph here, the one that begins the word of the Bible. The word of the Bible, that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, declares that the internal liberation of human beings to live the responsible life before God is the only way to overcome stupidity. What I think he's getting at here is that the difference between the true God and the false gods of any kind at all, the political ones or the religious ones, right, is that the true God sets people free for responsible life. And for Bonhoeffer, of course, as many of you know, that carries a lot of theological as well as ethical weight. To be responsible is to respond to the reality of the world as it is. And the world as it is the world where Christ is encountered. And using dominating power in place of truth, the big lie or empty rhetoric or whatever, is one way to push reality away and avoid responsibility. Right, so this whole dynamic where you let somebody else think for you, you think in slogans or whatever, it's one way to push reality away and avoid responsibility. Allowing oneself to be taken over, being made a fool of, is one way of avoiding it, and actually being the dictator, as it were, trying to run the place with your own power of your words is another, is the flip side. And both of those are persistent temptations, even for Christians. And Bonhoeffer, of course, in his lifetime, has seen that happen. What is most challenging and most encouraging here to me is that Bonhoeffer refuses to give up on or despise this stupid person, this person he can't reason with. This is the bit right at the end here, which it's further down the same essay. The only fruitful relation to human beings is love. That is the will to enter into and to keep community with them. God did not hold human beings in contempt, but became human for their sake. Seems the idea here is that the only way beyond this situation of power games and polarization and stupidity is keeping community. It's community. And by community, Bonhoeffer doesn't mean a space in which everyone agrees or pretends to agree. The one basis of community, this is what he's saying here, is that God became human for the sake of all the human beings. So forming community is not really about winning an argument, nor even just about having an argument. It's something about being open to learning who one is oneself and who the other is, which Bonhoeffer says we only really learn before God, because it's before God that we are freed from the multiple levels of falsehood and dominating power that stop us being ourselves. This isn't a full political programme, right? The formation of community that overcomes stupidity, but it's some fairly strong pointers to the direction one needs to look in order to address this kind of problem. That on the one hand, you can't reason and argue your way out of it, but the other hand, you can't get round it by just saying, oh, well, those are they are the stupid, they are the people that I won't have anything to do with, they are the people I despise, they are the people I treat with contempt. It must be this return again into community. Right. Second piece I want to talk about maybe has a few more ways forward in it. It's a more complex one. Because I want to talk a bit about the essay that Bonhoeffer wrote on what does it mean to tell the truth. This is the essay, some of you may know, that he wrote while he was under interrogation in relation to his role in the conspiracy against Hitler. So he's under interrogation and he's writing about what it means to tell the truth. It's an odd situation to be writing about truth, but perhaps because of that, I often find it a helpful starting point. It was only a starting point for him as well, because he never finished it. A helpful starting point for addressing situations where the problem is not, oh, look, a few people are telling lies and it's really bad to lie, so we need to stop them. Right, that's not the problem. The problem is we don't even know what telling the truth here would look like. Because even when people say things that are factually correct, it doesn't seem to advance truth. The environment is wrong. We cannot get through to a space in which truth-telling means something. And that, I think, he's maybe got some ways forward from that. Right, so now I've got another slide with some more quotations and we'll see what folks think of them. So first thing I want to do is have a look at the second thing he said, actually the second bit I've got here, which is about lying and what lying is. It's the bit that begins sometimes, says, sometimes speech that is thoroughly correct and incontestable is nevertheless a lie, such that if a notorious liar once tells the truth, to throw people off, or the decisive truth remains intentionally hidden. So that's getting to this sense that the essence of lying, the essence of lying is found much deeper than in the contradiction between thought and speech. So that's pointing back to some of the stuff I'm saying earlier, right? That sometimes the problem with truth is deeper than just sort of people say things that happen not to be correct, or that they happen to know are not correct. That there's a deeper problem which you can nonetheless say is somehow a problem that's corrosive to truth, that's against truth. But then the tenor of the whole essay is that happens quite a lot, and that means being truthful and being faithful to truth can be genuinely difficult. That's what he says right at the beginning. What matters is the right word for any given circumstance. To discover this is a matter of long, earnest and continual effort that's based in experience and the perception of reality. I found it very helpful when I realised that Bonhoeffer's expanded account of truth allows you to make some sense, or at least shows you some sense can be made of a system or an institution or a whole situation that makes it hard to tell the truth. I wrote an angry article about this a few years back in response to being asked to deliver too many meaningless, or in some cases actually invented, statistics to a university bureaucracy. I got so cross about this that I found that Bonhoeffer on interrogation by the Nazis was the only way to express my frustration. But I'm now trying to apply that to a wider post-truth problem, to a situation in which, even if you put forward the facts, they can be swept aside. A situation in which the power that backs up the words, or the rhetorical power that they exert, matters more than relation to anything real. And I find Bonhoeffer's way of looking at it helpful, because he recognises that the reality with which we have to deal, the reality to which we are desperately trying to relate in trying to bear witness to truth in this situation, is not even just a world out there of bare neutral facts. It's also the reality of human relationships, the reality of this beloved and messed up context in which we live. That's why he can talk about lying in this bit that I've put in bold as the destruction of reality, the negation, denial, and deliberate and willful destruction of reality as it's created by God and exists in God. The full quotation there is insofar as that's done through speaking. And then the flip side of this, that our word in union with the word of God is intended to express what is real as it is in God. Bonhoeffer looks at communication, including just trying to say how things are, as always relationships, and always a way of forming and performing relationships. And then lets you widen out the question: how do our actions in speaking and our ways of forming and performing the relationships in which we speak and communicate reflect or betray the truth of how things are? He says that telling the truth requires attention to the reality. This is the last quote here: the reality of the place in which I stand, and who calls on me to speak and what authorises me to speak, the whole context in which I'm working, and the relationship between me and the other person, and the subject matter. And that it's recognising all of that as it is in God, right? As it's created by God and as it exists in God. Still sounds quite high flown, and at this point he's just throwing ideas out. But I think in practice this can be quite helpful. What does this mean? For a start, like the previous discussion, like the discussion of stupidity, it rules out contempt for the other person, writing them off, trying to fool them, trying to make a fool of them. Even caught inside the post-truth situation or the pointless argument or anything like that, there's a primary responsibility, a God-given responsibility to the neighbour, to the concrete other person in front of me, to who is there and where I stand. The call into community isn't an optional extra. For Bonhoeffer, that is reality as it exists in God, that human beings are created for community and redeemed into community. And community is part of what's destroyed by the lie. That's this point about the destruction of reality. Destruction of reality as it's created by God and exists in God. The polarization is a destruction of community. The substitution of power for truth is a destruction of community. And put very simply, I don't know if this is simple, I've put this very simply, whatever stops me from seeing and loving the person, the neighbour, is a problem and a lie, whether that's an ideology inside my own head or the propaganda I'm hearing, and it needs to be resisted all the way down the line. But the question is how to resist it without just being part of the problem. It seems to me that Bonhoeffer's response to the situation where truth is lost or truth is at risk brings together responsibility, I can do something differently, and realism. There's a wider context here, and one act doesn't fix it. What I say and how I say it and where and to whom does matter. I can learn appropriate forms of communication. You can learn this, you can discover this. Yeah. I can respond better or worse from the place at which I stand. At the same time, I'm not floating above the fray. I'm embroiled in the situation. I'm not in a position to destroy the whole edifice of lies. And I'm also not in a place of absolute moral safety. Yeah, I haven't. I can't sort of draw a boundary and say I follow the following rules, I'll be fine. I think there is something important here about resistance to the kind of moral boundary drawing that creates and reinforces political and religious tribes in our own time. The point, Bonhoeffer thinks, he says fairly consistently, not just here, elsewhere, is not to make oneself good. It's not that I end up being a good person. The point is to be able to attend to the complexity of reality and discern the will of God from that perspective. To think it possible you may be right, so it's possible that you can do something, that you can be, you can discern and act on the will of God in that situation. And possible that you may be mistaken, that you don't have an invulnerable moral space from which to act, right? So what does Christian witness to truth look like in the context we're in? I think I've made a few suggestions already. One being that there's a strong aspect of what I call in a lot of contexts denying the lies, noting what it is in the current environment of public discourse that is preventing us from holding us back from community, preventing us from love of neighbour, preventing us from hearing, having reality push back, right, from hearing the inconvenient truth, noticing what that is, and in many of these cases, simply the noticing or the acting differently is a form of resistance to it. So sometimes witness to truth is simply witness against the lie, right, or against the problem. It also seems to me that one way to resist the loss of truth without being pulled into this sort of destructive zero-sum game of the post-truth space is to begin from attention to particular complex other people, other lives, other stories, other narratives. To listen deeply and to tell what we hear and see to those who need to hear it. To attend to the persons, not the slogans. Right? To bear witness especially to people and stories that do not fit with prevailing narratives or that cannot find places to be heard in the prevailing wars of words. What I've tried to write about elsewhere as resisting big lies by telling small stories, because it's the small stories that are overridden, right? It's the complexity, it's the reality of the human life as whole human life. It's the possibility of encountering that which is genuinely different. That is what is being overridden, and that's what one needs to stand for. That's certainly not a comprehensive solution or a political programme, but it's perhaps one form of everyday Christian witness to truth. And I very much look forward to hearing further reflections. At that point, I'm stopping the screen share, and really looking forward to hearing the discussion. And it's nice to see you all again.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That was an absolute template of what these seminar presentations should be, rooted in Bonhoeffer, throwing a lens on a current issue with lots and lots of insights. Thank you so much. That was absolutely superb. And I just turn immediately to John for his response and before we move to a wider discussion. So it's a very warm welcome again to you, John.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with you. And that was a wonderful introduction, more than an introduction. Thank you, Rachel. What more can I say, kind of thing. But you did allow me to read your paper before, so I knew what was coming. And I kept that in mind when I was jotting down a few things that are complementary to what you have said, I think. Some of them may be repeating what you have said and introducing one or two other possible insights. I'd like to begin by distinguishing between speaking the truth, doing the truth, and being the truth. Because it does seem to me that one can speak the truth without necessarily doing it or being it. And for Bonhoeffer, these were all important, and perhaps it was more important to do the truth than to speak it, and to be the truth than to, let's say, live a lie. So I think it is important that we keep those distinctions in mind when we talk about truth. A second thing, which has already been alluded to, is that while there may not be any absolute truth in terms of us having it, that doesn't mean to say there isn't absolute truth, but that we don't have it because we are not living in the ultimate. But that doesn't mean that everything is relative. So that's another tension that we have to keep in mind. We cannot claim to have all the truth, but neither should we deny that there is truth. And it is important to distinguish between truth and falsehood. And Rachel did allude to that in what she said. The third thing, which Rachel has talked about at some length, is that telling the truth was critical during the time of the resistance, but it was always understood as telling the truth in response to a very complex reality. There was no easy truth, and it wasn't easy to know how to tell the truth, because truth is not an abstraction, it is always embedded in a reality. So when we tell the truth, we are always doing it within a particular context, and that context makes a difference to the way in which we tell the truth and the way in which truth is understood. I'm just throwing out a few jottings as a way to build on what Rachel has said and prepare the way for further discussion. One thing that I think is very important in terms of how Bonhoeffer understood the truth was that it unmasked conflicts. And it opened up possibilities that would otherwise be closed. So when you don't speak the truth, sometimes what you are doing is closing down the possibility of, let's say, working for justice, working for peace, working for reconciliation. So telling the truth becomes more than simply telling the truth. It becomes a means to action, to doing the truth and being the truth. And this is terribly important because in South Africa, we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the point of it all was not to tell the truth. The point of it all was to work for reconciliation. So truth became a way towards a means towards an end rather than an end in itself. Because you can easily, well, not easily, but you can tell the truth without the truth becoming something that heals, restores, and renews. So the question is, to what end do we tell the truth? Which also raises the important point, at what point are we silent and hold back from trying to tell the truth? Because the time might not be opportune for telling the truth. It might not be opportune for several reasons. The one is people might not be in a position to hear it. Or it might be that we need to know more in order to tell the truth, and we don't have the whole picture. So telling the truth is a means to an end, but not necessarily an end in itself. And how it prepares the way for being the truth and doing the truth is important. One of the things that interests me in Bonhoeffer's writings is what he says about technology and science. And this does bring us very much into the debate now about telling the truth in response to scientific evidence. Because the undermining of science, as Rachel referred to it, is absolutely one of the major problems that we have to deal with, evidence-based science. At the same time, theology has a critical responsibility towards science, namely to raise questions about the nature of truth, because truth is not necessarily always scientific. There's more to truth than scientific fact, which doesn't mean that scientific fact is unimportant at all. It has to be defended. But in the debate around science, it is very important for the church, for Christians, not to be sucked into the idea that everything that science says is therefore true. I think theology brings a critical dimension to it, but on the premise that evidence-based science is fundamentally important. So it's not a rejection of that, but it is a rejection of the idea that science or technology is ipso facto true, irrespective, because there are bigger issues at stake sometimes in terms of scientific evidence and technological progress. I think that's probably self-evident. Then I want to pick up on the stupidity question, because I love that passage in After 10 Years, or what it's now called. It's called something differently in the new edition. But I should know because I edited it, but I can't remember. But in the same piece of writing, Bonhoeffer also is critical of reasonable people. And I think this is a very important thing to keep in mind, because it's quite easy to be critical of foolish people and stupidity. But when we are critical of reasonable people, we are really becoming a little bit critical of ourselves, who claim to be more reasonable than stupid people. And Bonhoeffer said, no, wait a moment. A lot of the people who supported Hitler were reasonable. they weren't all dyed-in-the-wool Nazis or ideologists. They were people who said, let's listen to the other side. To make up our minds, we need more evidence. There are all sorts of ways that we, especially academics, function to prevent ideological mudslinging. So it's something that we need to keep in mind when we tell the truth. Now, I jotted down something that Bonhoeffer said, then I highlighted, then I printed it out, and of course the highlighting covered everything in the print. But this is what he said. He was caustic about reasonable people as much as he was about stupid people. That is, people who naively misread reality and think that with the best of intentions and a bit of reason, they could stop Hitler in his tracks. So it's the idea that if only we could get people to be reasonable, the truth would win. And Bonhoeffer says it's not quite so straightforward as that. And I think this is part of the problem that we are struggling with, because there are many people, some very highly intellectual, reasonable people involved in what we might call the Trump project. In fact, they are the people that often call the tune in terms of what Trump says. And you can see this because several of them have PhDs from Yale and elsewhere, and who would claim to be reasonable, and who would say to the critics of stupid people, now look, don't be critical of them, be reasonable. And do you have the full picture? Do you really know what you're talking about? So this is not in any way a rejection of the main point being made, but it is a warning about putting our faith in the idea that reason will win the argument, that reason is always the way to deal with the problem, which doesn't mean to say we should be irrational, on the other hand, because there are many people who are highly intelligent and well educated who are actually stupid in Bonhoeffer's sense. So lastly, and I think this ends where Rachel ended, the crisis we face, I think, is a spiritual crisis. It's not just a crisis around faith, around truth. It's deeper than that. It's a spiritual crisis, by which I mean, and again, Rachel pointed to this at the beginning, there's a lack of wisdom and a lack of concern for wisdom in all its dimensions, which includes the ability to discern, the ability to engage in meaningful conversation, and the wisdom that actually builds relationships and community, which is what Rachel was talking about. Because to do and be the truth, you need a community of people who are doing that. When we say the church should speak truth to power, it's often the leaders making statements and things of that kind. But what we need is communities that are being the truth and doing the truth without necessarily always claiming to speak the truth. If, for example, we speak out about the need for society to be more democratic and inclusive, but in fact, the church is not being inclusive and being what it's calling on the world to be, is not particularly effective. So to speak the truth to power requires communities that are being and doing the truth, and who maybe sometimes just have to shut up and get on and doing that. And I think that this is what faith communities really should be focusing on in order to give their words about truth, their truth-telling, to give their truth-telling power. Because if it doesn't arise out of being and doing the truth, your telling the truth doesn't have power. So I come back to where I started, the distinction between the three of speaking the truth, very important, but not without doing the truth and being the truth, because then speaking the truth loses its power.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, John. Rachel, would you, before we move to a broader discussion, would you like to respond? You are muted at the moment, Rachel.
Oh goodness, yes. I don't want to take up any too much of the time that would otherwise go into wider discussion, because there's such a lot here. I really appreciate you, John, speaking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think that's a fascinating example, and one could kind of follow that through in various directions. I think, including the suggestion that, coming back to your final point, that part of what's going on there, right, is also the formation of community, right? So the sense of we cannot. How can we truly be together and be one people? And that particular acts of speaking the truth, like you rightly say, are a part of that, but they're not ends in themselves. But what's being sought is a community that is true to its calling before God, and true to itself, and then people can truly see and understand and be with one another. And so there's some really, really important stuff there. I think that I also wanted to say I really appreciate the comment about the reasonable people. I mean, what I see, and I don't know if you'd agree, in the bit on Folly, on Dummheit, which is this, it's a slightly different section of the essay, right? It is, I read, part of what's going on there is you're pointing out to people who think that they can solve everything with reason that they just can't, because this is a problem that is deeper than just, oh, these people haven't heard the best arguments yet, and if they did, like me, then they would all come round. So that it is actually about, so it is precisely the other side of the same coin. It's about the limits of the reasonableness, and there's something about what comes through. It is really interesting to me that the response to Folly that is liberation, is inward liberation, but then very quickly moves on to this discussion about contempt for humanity, and that the real challenge, the thing that we're up against, is that we're all the time at risk of writing people off, of saying that a large proportion of these people, because they've gone along with these terrible things, we cannot deal with them, we cannot be with them. And that's the spiritual risk for the people who see the problem and are trying to do something about it, is that they will get themselves into the place where they cannot find a way to engage with others, and this deep need for community, and to keep coming back to question of community seems really important there. And on the science, so the little bit I said here about science is part of a longer discussion, which is we'll agree with what we'll agree absolutely with the concern about setting up the scientific fact as the model of truth. Yeah, I think that's a problem. But what I'm interested in, and I do think is worth exploring, is the basic basic presupposition of the scientific inquiry, sees as most broadly as possible, which is this double sense that we trust our capacity to know and engage with the real, and we trust that the real pushes back on us, right? So that you're neither living in a chaotic world of just brute facts that don't make any sense and all throw at you, nor in a world that you create out of your own mind and can shape to your own will. And that kind of model of confidence and humility in the face of the real, which I do think is the scientific enterprise as done well is one of the areas of human endeavour where we see that going on, and the worry is that an anti-science move also becomes an anti we can have some sort of meaningful engagement with reality move, and that's where it gets worrying. But yeah, there's a longer conversation to have there, I think, about what the
I
theology
think
of science underlying it. Yeah.
If I can come in on that, for me it became something that made me think about this issue. I've just finished a book on Bonhoeffer, and the last chapter is on artificial intelligence. Because here we are dealing with science reaching and breaking beyond borders. I mean, that's what we are having to deal with now. And people putting their faith in artificial intelligence as though it was wisdom, because it is scientific, if you like. It arises out of technological advance, and it's going to solve all our problems like other technologies have over the centuries. It's a tool that now can do what needs to be done. So it's in connection with where science is in certain respects at the moment, which is crossing boundaries, which are problematic. So that's where my thinking.
And I think one would have to have a conversation then about the scientific and the technological. But
it's a big debate, But clearly, fake news and falsehood and so forth, and artificial intelligence, all of those things now have taken on a new dimension, because the way in which falsehoods can be spread with an authoritative scientific voice.
Yeah, and it's a great point. I think AI becomes a symptom of what you're talking about earlier, is the lack of wisdom, right? Because it's a sort of manifestation of the recycling of the slogan, right? And the recycling of the fake facts.
Exactly.
So, yeah,
so
it's exactly as stupid as the people.
Absolutely. One other thing that came to mind when you were talking about building community. I mean, I don't know how often my bad luck is to have my television on when the BBC is or Sky News is reporting debates about the Prime Minister's questions, and seeing two rows of intelligent people fighting each other in a way that doesn't seem to be getting at the truth, because they are scoring points. And they may both be telling the truth, but it doesn't necessarily lead anywhere. Which leads me to think about speaking the truth in love. Paul's words in Galatians is different to speaking the truth, because when you speak the truth in love, you're actually building community in order to arrive at the truth together. Because for one party to arrive at the truth and leave the other party behind without coming with them to the truth, you haven't actually gained much ground. So how do we discover the truth together when we start at divergent points? Seems to me to be critical, and it happens in church assemblies and conferences. People are fighting from different positions and not getting to actually the truth that builds community and responds to the challenges of the world. So this is part of going back to when I was talking about speaking the truth. It's that's well and good, but if it's not in love, it is actually not going to achieve anything.
Thank you. Just to, first of all, a procedural or a technical point. Matt, at the moment, everybody's on the sort of the right-hand side of my screen, so I haven't got a gallery view of everybody. So if somebody waves their hand, I'm not necessarily going to see them.
That's right. I'll keep an eye on that.
Yeah. Okay. But there are a couple of questions and points being raised in the chat. The first is from Simon Barrow, who asks, how may we best respond to the way MAGA, not least through Eric Metaxas' book, have been seeking to appropriate Bonhoeffer for ends which many of us would see at odds with honest truth-telling in and from Bonhoeffer. And below that, another participant, John McCabe, has noted a book by Kevin O'Farrell, A Theology of the Exception, which he comments has insights and may relate to this question. And then there's a follow-up question from Simon. Also, how does the recognition that from a Christian perspective, truth has an apocalyptic eschatological dimension and an as yet unknownness or an awaiting to be unveiled quality influence our approaches to truth-seeking and truth-telling? I didn't read that very well. Shall I read the last bit again? How
I
does
mean, we can read the chat. Oh, I can see the
you
chat
can read
anyway.
your chat as well? Sorry, I was forgetting.
I think.
Well, thank you to Simon and John for those, and I invite responses from
I
Rachel.
got the point, yeah.
Yes. Hi, Simon.
Hi.
It's nice to see you. Edinburgh represent. Yes. I mean, I'd love to hear John's comments on the first of these, on both, obviously, but on the misappropriation of Bonhoeffer, because obviously that's something that the Bonhoeffer scholarly community as a whole have been pretty concerned about for some time. And it's always a source of anxiety to me when I'm teaching about Bonhoeffer that, you know, folks are going to go online and find this stuff and find him being used in this way. For those, I don't know, for those in the room that are not familiar, one of this is both, I would say, just a historical misrepresentation of Bonhoeffer, one, and then also a very odd theological interpretation too of Bonhoeffer that ends up saying, well, you know, Bonhoeffer's why you should support Trump, basically, because this is even though, you know, it has all these moral issues with it, but you should be like Bonhoeffer and do the, you know, courageous political thing in order to save your country from the evil liberals and vote Trump. This was the line that was taken, was pretty shocking, remains pretty shocking. So how does one respond? I mean, as a matter of fact, and as I'm sure Simon and others here know, there has been a really significant pushback from Bonhoeffer scholars on the point, you know, simply saying, well, this is why this is wrong, this is why this is not the way to interpret him. And as an academic, I obviously do think that matters. I obviously do think it's not useful to have some of the most widely circulated material about Bonhoeffer being straight down the line inaccurate. But we're in this interesting problem, the sort of thing that what John was raising there, right, is that actually what's going to address the problem, right? Are we dealing here with reasonable people, as it were? Are we dealing? Are the folk that really like that stuff? Are they taken to it because they're persuaded that there's a historical case, or what else is going on here, and how do we address what else is going on? One of the things that I actually sort of struggle with as a Bonhoeffer scholar, or as somebody who gets identified as a Bonhoeffer scholar, is this determination that he's going to be the hero who's going to fix everything, and this idea that we always need the hero that's going to fix everything, and it's Bonhoeffer or it's Trump or it's whoever. That whole attitude is kind of the problem. So I think one of the other areas where I would want to be trying to do alternative things, or trying to you know, put alternative models, is to say, no, actually we haven't got one thinker or one great figure, one great mind who is going to fix the world for you. That's quite a dangerous approach. Here are a range of other voices. Here are many other figures and ideas and questions that you should be looking at, because anything that relies on the one simple story being the true simple story is going to be a problem. So there's this thing about not just trying to replace the the big story you don't like with a big story that you do like, because then people still stuck in this model of saying, we've got to have the big story to follow. Yeah, I'm not sure whether that made sense, but I don't know. I don't know whether John has.
John did have his hand up as well, having put that in the chat. Do you want to?
It's a very interesting question, because am I muted?
No.
I've been in the thick of it a little bit, because I was asked to write an essay on 5 of the major biographies of Bonhoeffer, and the German biographies avoid, like the plague, any relating Bonhoeffer's story to contemporary issues. The American biographies are all about the cultural wars in America and how Bonhoeffer can be claimed for that. Whether it's Metaxas on the one side or others on the other side. I know where I would come down in preference, but is this any different from the Bible? I mean, we can't control the interpretation of the Bible. And there are a lot of supporters, let's say, of right-wing politics who are quoting the Bible, just as they are quoting Bonhoeffer. So it's the same problem. And it's a bigger problem than just dealing with the Bonhoeffer story. It's about how do we present the Christian story so that, in fact, it can be recognized that this account of Bonhoeffer can't possibly be right if Bonhoeffer was operating out of the gospel rather than from other premises. So it's part of a much bigger problem than just the Bonhoeffer problem. For what it's worth, I think that's important, because we all quote texts, we all quote Bonhoeffer for our position, is that what we mean by speaking the truth?
Yeah.
There's several Johns. John McKay, would you like to comment further? You made the comment in the chat and you had your hand up. You're on mute.
I'm sorry I was a little bit late at the start, Rachel, so I didn't hear everything of the wonderful contribution that you made. And John, I've so enjoyed too all the lovely perspectives you've brought. So yes, it was me who wrote about Kevin O'Farrell and the theology of the exception, which kind of chimes in well to the overall seminar. But I just wanted to just introduce a note of encouragement, really, for everyone on the chat, to say that perhaps it would have been in the spirit of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a sort of espionage Abwehr basis, that I have joined Eric Metaxas's innermost mailing list, and I like to see what he's really thinking and saying to his closest supporters. And actually, this week he is completely horrified, because the kind of cry of now battle cry urgency has come out from him, saying, "Gosh, this is terrible. Bonhoeffer is being hijacked by other Christians in America." So I just wanted to share that into the live discussion that we're having, that a point has been reached for Eric Metaxas that has for him crossed a line. And so I'm finding that I'm watching with interest, but I'm finding it encouraging.
Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. Do we want to say something about Simon's second question, Alan?
Yep. Okay.
I was just noticing that was there, and that, but I didn't know if there were other questions waiting. No.
Also, how does the recognition that from a Christian's perspective, truth has an apocalyptic eschatological dimension and as yet unknownness or an awaiting to be unveiled quality influence our approaches to truth seeking and truth telling.
Well, yeah, that's exactly why we cannot claim the absolute truth.
In my book. So yeah, I want to threaten it.
We're in the penultimate, but the question is, how does our response to the issues and the questions of today relate to how we understand what the ultimate is all about?
Yeah.
And I become a little platonic at that point in terms of truth's goodness and beauty and various other things, as to in what way is the penultimate actually pointing in that direction.
And I feel like John's a really, really valuable. I should have mentioned earlier the emphasis on doing the truth. This Johannine, what I see is very much a Johannine emphasis on doing the truth or living in truth, if you want to use the Václav Havel expression, becomes very important, because if we think about truth as something that we live towards or move towards, right, it's not simply a matter of corresponding or mapping onto something that's already there. It is something that you're living into, right? So the seeking of truth, right, or the engagement with truth is itself a truthful way and a truthful way of living, way of existing. So that's very much how I'd want to play it out. And I actually think, for what it's worth, I think that it's relatively neglected in Christian theologies of truth. And although John's absolutely right that you can read Bonhoeffer that way, it has a it's there and I would say quite implicit in what he's doing, but it's something that one can absolutely pick up and play up. Yeah, so it's something really important about truth being only found, as it were, in the way of engaging and seeking, because that's the forward movement, that's the eschatological movement, the as yet unknown. But actually, this is John's point, that the way that Bonhoeffer thinks about the ultimate and the penultimate, it's really there. Yeah, the ultimate is real. The truth is real, but it is really not here where we are. We really are in the penultimate. So the movement is always a movement. Truth, being in truth, living in truth, speaking in truth is always a movement toward truth. Something like that. Yeah. No, very much. I want to go with that. Yeah.
There is another comment from John McCabe, which I think is a technical note. Really. It says, for John de Gruchy, John, you renamed after 10 years as an account at the turn
of the year.
Well, I can see you've got Bonhoeffer's, the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Werke up there, and beneath it, Dietrich Bonhoeffer Works in English, and is exactly the same. What's over here?
It's right there. It's right there.
So well done. Thank you.
I'm going to go on calling it after 10 years though, because it's just that in my head. That's it's stuck so firmly in my head by that name. But it's a fascinating piece. I mean, isn't it? And one of the things that's interesting to me, and John will know more about this than I do, is the way that it's one finds echoes in it in many contemporaneous accounts of living under Nazi rule for those who were in the resistance. It has a kind of well, it's got the theological depth, but it also has this real sense of being drawn from experience. He's met these people, he's been in those conversations, he knows what it's like, and then you hear it, you see it echoed elsewhere. And to find that kind of that bringing together of really, really profound reading of a context. This is the time we're in. This is what it looks like. And the deep asking of the question: what does that mean? What are we meant to do? What is the will of God in this situation? Is quite.
And we might want to, just occurs to me, we might want to connect that to the emphasis in Bonhoeffer's writing, especially in the letters from prison, on metanoia, of a change of mind.
Yes.
Because we grow into the truth. To know the truth implies your mind is in a process of renewal, of change. And in Bonhoeffer's 39 years, I mean, or effectively 19 years when he was dealing with this stuff, you can see the development in Bonhoeffer, even though there are some fundamental things that form the basis for everything. But he was continually grappling with the truth, as though truth is always something we're engaging in because it's always beyond us. So that our grasp at the moment may be truthful, but not full of truth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's that, and again, it's that doubleness. I do quite like my think it possible you may be right and think it possible that you may be mistaken, because that's also a backward looking and a forward looking word. This really is what I can say from where I am now. And it's important to affirm that, because this is your point about relativism. It's important not to knock it all away into relativism. It's important for people who have experienced, I don't know, who have experienced suffering, experienced injustice or something, to be able to stand up and say, no, this really happened to me. Yeah, no, this is my story. This is my truth.
Is wrong.
It's important to be able to say, and then the other side of that is, well, what happens to that? What's done with it? What it means? What bigger truths it's pointing to is ahead. We don't know yet. So, like, well, okay, this is my story, but that is only part of the story. Yeah, because my story is only part of the story. So that kind of doubleness of a confidence in what we can say now, but the recognition that is not the whole story and that there will be more to be said. That's the kind of tension one's looking for. But that's completely the opposite of saying these are our facts. Yeah. And we don't want to hear any different from anybody else, because this is the version of the truth that enables our group to maintain its identity and its power, so we won't hear anything outside. It's completely the opposite mode.
If I can stick my hand up, there was one point when John was speaking that struck me in relation to a previous seminar that we had. You were saying that Bonhoeffer was very critical of, quote, reasonable people that thought they could engage and change people's minds, etc., when they couldn't. And there was a kind of inference that some things just cannot be engaged with, they just have to be resisted, which obviously there's a tension between saying, well, you can never write people off and so on. But what struck me is the first seminar in this series of Stephen Plant referred to a very interesting thing in his chapter in the Oxford Handbook on Bonhoeffer, where he's talking about, in a sense, Bonhoeffer's politics. And as a bitter critic of Weimar, Stephen Plant quoted a couple of exchanges with Bonhoeffer, which was kind of more or less saying, look, US, UK style democracy won't work. Certainly the means is that we have to have some form of authoritative government, which is accountable to the church, etc. And I can't remember the precise references that Stephen Plant gave, but it did make me wonder whether some of what Bonhoeffer is saying is easier if you haven't got to deal in a democracy. That, you know,
I think it was Bonhoeffer wasn't a liberal Democrat as we understand it. And I wrote a book on Christianity and democracy once, I can't remember now, but I did have a big section on Bonhoeffer and democracy, and he didn't quite fit into the liberal democratic thing, democratic socialist maybe. But I think that the danger is claiming Bonhoeffer as the defender of our position, whatever that might be, and therefore failing to allow him to critique our position, whatever it may be. And I think this is a bit of a problem in the United States, where the battle lines are so strongly drawn that people are not hearing each other. Now, I know who I would prefer to hear and be associated with, but in these kind of contexts, and a comment about being on Metaxas's mailing list, I think is quite a fun thing, quite a worthwhile thing to follow up, because what was that statement of Jesus about? Sometimes we will hear things from unlikely sources. I can't remember exactly what it was, but because we're not listening. And we do believe that those who are opposing us are not actually listening to our argument, and sometimes we're not listening to them. And the criteria is, it seems to me, is does our listening and our hearing build community? Because we may well be hearing what somebody else is saying and objecting to it, but what is the grounds on which we're objecting to it? Is it because it doesn't fit in with our understanding, or is it because it is undermining and destroying the possibility of community? And it is that which makes it actually false. And this is the problem with fake news. It's not that it's wrong as news, because all news is a little bit twisted, but it actually is destructive.
Yeah. And the destructive of community.
Let's take another issue. For example, in some respects, Bonhoeffer was quite conservative about certain issues, abortion being one of them, euthanasia being another.
Well, marriage. I mean, he's very conservative on a lot of things.
You could quote Bonhoeffer in defense of very conservative moral positions today, and you wouldn't be quoting him out of context. You really wouldn't.
No, that's absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, I think the question about democracy is a really interesting one, because I mean, I quite like. I mean, I don't know whether this is probably somewhat to John's purpose. I think we're in a similar place with this. I actually quite like the fact that I deeply disagree with Bonhoeffer about quite a lot of things, precisely because that means there's a critical interaction. You know, I'm not about to start saying he's the answer to everything, because he's clearly not, because he's quite sexist and various other things, and so on. And he's not, and he's not a Democrat in, I would say, in anything like the sense that a lot of people now are. I mean, but that's not, you know, again, I suspect, like John, that doesn't invalidate. I think that doesn't invalidate the claims about community, because although from my point of view, I would be very keen to defend, a liberal democracy as a context in which community is possible, in a context that's conducive to living in community in certain ways that other political systems are not. They aren't the same thing. They kind of can't be, just because across time and space, the liberal democracy are the tiny minority, and living in community of the kind that Bonhoeffer's describing has happened in many different times and spaces, and one has to hold those in tension. And that doesn't mean you can't use arguments from Bonhoeffer to defend political positions, including political positions he doesn't hold. I can absolutely do that, but I think there are some degrees of freedom in there, right? Which is great, again, because then we don't have to have the argument with Metaxas about who's got Bonhoeffer 100% right?
Exactly.
Because they will actually. The reason that Bonhoeffer will not give you a straightforward answer to the problems of the USA in the 2020s is that he's not there. It's not his context. It's not his questions. If you want to interpret him, then interpret him, but at least be honest and say, I'm interpreting him, and other interpretations are possible.
I mean, you can use Bonhoeffer's writings on the Jews in a way that could now be used against the Palestinians.
It's a fair point.
But I think you'd be misusing Bonhoeffer because it's a totally different historical context, and really missing the point of Bonhoeffer taking the side of those who are oppressed. And the oppressed are not always the same people.
It is now getting close to 3:30. I have one comment in the chat which I would love to end on. I don't know, Matt, if there's anybody trying to ask a question that I can't see.
Not that I can see now.
Well, as I say, it is nearly 3:30. I'll just read this quote from Sarah Carter Easter, which is a lovely thing to end on, and then move to a more general thank you. She writes, a big thank you to Dr. Muers, Dr. Gruchy and all the speakers this seminar season. As always, Project Bonhoeffer has offered those interested in Bonhoeffer and from around the world, I'm in Canada, a series of high quality and intellectually stimulating set of papers and discussions. Thank you so much again, and I'm looking forward to the next set of seminars. Well, thank you very much. And that's genuine. That's not a...
Not a plant.
I'm glad somebody's telling the truth.
It's very, very welcome. And thank you very much for that. Well, what can I say? Thank you very much, John and Rachel, for an absolutely fascinating hour and a half. It was absolutely superb. Thank you very, very much indeed. Those of you who have enjoyed this and possibly weren't at the previous set of seminars, if you go back on Project Bonhoeffer's site or the Project Bonhoeffer YouTube in February of last year, there was a fascinating exchange between John de Gruchy and Laurie Brant Hale as well, which touched on some of the issues which have cropped up now about metaxas and so on. And that's available on our website and on our YouTube channel. But thank you again very, very much. There's something just appeared in the chat.
I know that's it should be a private that should be a private message exchange, I think. Yes.
So again, thank you very much indeed. And again, thanks, Rachel, and thanks, John.
Great to see you all. Thank you.
Your eminence, John, and your distinction. You're the most approachable
Well,
human being I know. You reply to emails within hours. Always say yes. You are just Project Bonhoeffer's best friend. Thank you very much.
that's AI doing it. It's not me responding.
No, come on.
Great to see you all. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye bye.